The faint crackling of an old recording fills the darkness. A soft, haunting melody plays, reminiscent of late Victorian music boxes. The screen remains black as we hear the sound of wind, distant church bells, and then a child's muffled sob. There are moments captured in time that hold more than what the eye can see. Photographs that seem ordinary at first glance, but upon closer inspection, reveal something that changes everything we thought we knew. History is not just a collection of facts and dates, but a tapestry of human experiences, often hidden in the shadows of the past. Today, we uncover one such shadow. Professor Eleanor Wright adjusts her glasses as she peers at her computer screen, surrounded by stacks of historical journals and photographic plates. Her office is a blend of cutting-edge technology and historical artifacts, a digital scanner beside Victorian-era cameras, preservation tools beside holographic displays. Rain taps gently against the windows of Cambridge University's Historical Analysis Department, creating a rhythmic backdrop to her work. Professor Eleanor Wright has dedicated her career to the photographic preservation and analysis of Victorian-era images. Specializing in what she calls visual archaeology, she has developed revolutionary techniques to extract hidden details from photographs once thought to be lost to time. For 20 years, she has peeled back the layers of history, one photographic plate at a time, revealing secrets that have remained hidden for generations. "James, you need to see this." Her voice betrays a mixture of excitement and disbelief as she calls to her research assistant. Dr. James Harlow, a brilliant young historian specializing in 19th century social conditions, looks up from his own work. "Another ghost image in the Whitechapel collection?" he asks, making his way across the room. The ghost images had been their focus for months. Partially exposed plates that revealed shadowy figures when enhanced with Eleanor's pioneering techniques. No, something else entirely. The Preston Archive just digitized a series of plates from a photographer named Thomas Claremont. He was documenting living conditions in the industrial North during the 1890s. James leans in closer, his curiosity piqued. The screen displays a high-resolution scan of a glass photographic plate, the image remarkably well preserved despite its age. "Claremont, wasn't he commissioned by the social reform movement?" James asks, searching his memory for details about the photographer. "Yes, but he was largely forgotten. Most of his work was stored away after his death in 1901. The Preston Museum found these plates in their basement, still in their original wooden box. They were perfectly preserved, sealed in wax paper, and stored in a dry environment. It's as if someone wanted to ensure they'd survive intact." Eleanor clicks through several images, stark, powerful photographs of factory workers, coal miners, and street scenes depicting the harsh realities of Victorian industrial life. Each image shows extraordinary technical skill, with a clarity and depth uncommon for photographs of that era. "Who's the boy?" James asks as Eleanor stops on one particular image. The photograph shows a small boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, sitting alone on wooden steps outside a brick building. He's dressed in tattered clothes, short trousers, a worn cap, and shoes with visible holes. His face is partially obscured as he wipes tears from his eyes. The background reveals an industrial landscape, factory chimneys belching smoke into a gray sky, the grime of industry coating every surface. "That's what I'm trying to find out." The notes only identify the location as Millfield Factory District, November 1898. But look at the image quality. It's remarkable for something shot in such low light conditions. The detail is extraordinary, especially in the shadows. Most photographers of the period would have lost all that detail in darkness. James studies the image. "You're right. The tonal range is incredible. Look at how you can see the texture of the brick wall behind him, and even details in his clothing in the shadowed areas." Exactly. Claremont was known to be innovative, but this goes beyond the capabilities of standard equipment from that time. It's as if he had access to photographic technology that wouldn't be developed for decades. Little did Professor Wright know that this seemingly simple photograph would lead her team down a path of discovery that would challenge the very nature of historical documentation and force them to question what they thought they knew about the past. The streets are narrow, cobblestoned, and thick with fog. Coal smoke hangs in the air like a shroud, making breathing difficult and staining everything with soot. Men in flat caps trudge toward massive brick factories, their shoulders hunched against the biting November cold. Women in long skirts and shawls carry baskets of meager provisions, their faces etched with the weariness of constant struggle. Children in ragged clothes dart between adults. some heading to factories where they would work alongside their parents, others begging or selling matches and newspapers on corners. Industrial England in 1898 was a place of stark contrasts. While the wealthy enjoyed the fruits of the empire and technological advances like electric lighting and motor cars, the working poor lived in conditions that had changed little since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Queen Victoria had been on the throne for 6 decades, overseeing an era of unprecedented industrial growth and imperial expansion, but the benefits of this prosperity rarely reached those who powered the nation's factories with their labor. In Manchester, Liverpool, and Preston, sprawling factories dominated the skyline, their smokestacks painting the sky in perpetual shades of gray. The rhythmic clank of machinery provided a constant soundtrack to daily life. Despite the factory acts of the 1830s and 1840s, which had attempted to regulate working conditions, many workers, including thousands of children, still endured 14-hour days in dangerous conditions for mere pennies. Thomas Claremont was not like other photographers of his time. While many were content with staged portraits of the wealthy or picturesque landscapes that erased any hint of industrial blight, Claremont sought to document the harsh realities faced by the working class, particularly children. A tall man with piercing eyes and a carefully trimmed beard, he stood out in the industrial districts with his middle-class attire and the bulky camera he carried on a wooden tripod. "I believe that photography has a moral purpose," he once wrote in his journal. "To show what is, not what we wish to see. Only then can we hope for change." Rows of massive looms create a deafening noise inside the Millfield cotton mill. The air vibrates with the constant shuttling of mechanical parts. Children as young as 6 dart between the dangerous machinery, their small fingers tying broken threads, sweeping cotton waste from the floor, and performing the countless small tasks that keep the mill running. The air is thick with cotton particles, making breathing difficult and causing many workers to develop the chronic cough known as cotton lung after years of exposure. The factory floor is lit by gas lamps and skylights that do little to dispel the gloom. The children's faces are pale from lack of sunlight, many bearing the hollow-eyed look of chronic exhaustion. Despite laws limiting child labor, enforcement was lax, and poverty forced many families to send their children to work in dangerous conditions. Factory owners preferred children for certain tasks because their small hands could reach places adults couldn't, and they could be paid far less. Claremont had attempted to photograph inside several mills, usually being ejected before he could capture more than a few hasty images. On this particular day in November 1898, he had managed to set up his camera in a corner of the Millfield cotton mill, disguised as a visiting supplier. He had exposed 3 plates before the foreman noticed him. "Oi, no photographs in here. Get out before I call the constable," the man shouted, his face reddening with anger as he stomped toward Claremont. "I have permission from Mr. Thornberry," Claremont lied smoothly, referring to the mill owner, whom he knew was away in London. "He's commissioned a series of photographs documenting mill operations." "I don't care if the Queen herself commissioned you," the foreman growled, now close enough that Claremont could smell the tobacco on his breath. "No photographs. The workers get ideas when people like you come poking around. Now pack up and leave before I have you thrown out." Claremont faced constant opposition. Factory owners and even local officials were hostile to his work, recognizing that these images could fuel the growing social reform movement. The last decade of the 19th century had seen increasing public concern about working conditions, with reformers using photographs as evidence to lobby Parliament for stronger protections. For mill owners, photographers like Claremont represented a threat to their profits and practices. Reluctantly, Claremont packed his equipment and left, but he wasn't deterred. If he couldn't document conditions inside the factory, he would capture the toll they took on the workers as they emerged at day's end. Workers stream out of the factory gates as the shift changes, their exhausted faces and stooped postures telling the story that Claremont had been prevented from capturing inside. Claremont waits across the street, his camera ready but partially hidden beneath his coat to avoid drawing attention. The late afternoon light was fading fast, typical of the northern English autumn, but Claremont had prepared for this, using his modified camera and specially formulated photographic plates that could capture images in lower light than standard equipment allowed. That November day in 1898, Claremont positioned himself outside the Millfield cotton mill, hoping to capture the faces of child workers as they left after their 12-hour shift. He had already exposed several plates, documenting groups of children, some as young as 5 or 6, emerging from the massive brick building, and then he saw him, a boy who would have otherwise been just another anonymous child of the Industrial Revolution. Unlike the other children who hurried home in groups, this boy sat alone on the steps of an adjacent building, his small shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Claremont, seeing an opportunity to capture the human cost of child labor, quietly prepared his camera. The boy seemed unaware of Claremont's presence, lost in his own misery. Claremont focused his lens, careful to capture both the child's expression and the looming factory behind him, a juxtaposition of human suffering against the industrial might that caused it. As he prepared to expose the plate, Claremont noticed something unusual. A figure moved at the edge of his peripheral vision, but when he glanced up from his viewfinder, he saw no one there. Dismissing it as a trick of the fading light, Claremont exposed the plate, capturing the image that would become his most powerful work, and, over a century later, the source of an enduring mystery. What happened in the moments after he captured this image would remain unknown for more than a century. Back in the present day, Professor Eleanor Wright stares intently at her computer screen, the enhanced digital scan of Claremont's photograph revealing details invisible to the naked eye. I've been running enhancement algorithms on this image for days. There's something about this photograph that doesn't match the typical exposure techniques of the period. James leans in closer, studying the photograph. What do you mean? Claremont was known for his technical innovations, but the depth of field and the light sensitivity seem almost impossible for 1898. Eleanor points to several areas of the image. Look at how the foreground and background are both in focus, yet there's a beautiful bokeh effect around the edges. This kind of selective focus wasn't achievable with the lenses available then. Could he have modified existing equipment somehow? James suggests. Perhaps, but look at the background detail. Most photographs from this period would have these areas completely washed out or blurred, but you can see remarkable clarity even in the shadows. You can make out individual bricks in the factory wall behind the boy, and even read part of a sign in the distance. The silver halide emulsions of the 1890s simply couldn't capture this level of detail in such low-light conditions. James frowns, considering the implications. Could it be a later reproduction? Maybe someone enhanced it in the early 20th century? That was my first thought, Eleanor admits. But the provenance is solid. This glass plate has been untouched in that wooden box since Claremont's death, and I've analyzed the chemical composition. It's consistent with photographic emulsions from the 1890s, though with some unusual elements I haven't been able to identify. So either Claremont was decades ahead of his time in photographic technology, or there's something else going on here that we don't understand. Eleanor finishes his thought. But it wasn't the technical aspects of the photograph that would ultimately capture Professor Wright's attention. It was something else entirely. A detail so easy to miss that it had remained hidden in plain sight for 126 years. Later that night, the university building has grown quiet. Most researchers and students have left for the day, but the lab is still illuminated by the glow of computer screens. Eleanor works alone, running increasingly sophisticated enhancement algorithms on sections of the Claremont photograph. The rain has intensified, drumming against the windows and occasionally illuminated by flashes of lightning. Eleanor barely notices, completely absorbed in her work. She has been focusing on the boy's face, attempting to extract more detail that might help identify him. As she applies a new filter designed to enhance reflective surfaces, something unexpected appears on her screen. She leans forward, eyes widening in disbelief. That can't be right. Using specialized software developed for analyzing damaged or degraded historical images, Professor Wright began to extract details that would have been impossible to see with the naked eye. The program uses advanced AI algorithms to distinguish between actual image data and noise or damage, reconstructing what might have been present in the original scene based on surrounding pixels and known optical properties. Eleanor stares at the screen for several long moments, then reaches for her phone. James, I need you to come back to the lab, now. 20 minutes later, James hurries into the lab, his hair damp from the rain. What is it? What did you find? Eleanor gestures to her screen without speaking. The image displayed is a highly magnified portion of the original photograph. The crying boy's eyes, now rendered in remarkable clarity. Look at his eyes. James leans in, studying the image carefully. I don't understand. What am I looking for? Not his eyes exactly. Look at what's reflected in them. James looks more closely, then steps back in surprise. Is that a person? It's called a corneal reflection. The eye works like a convex mirror, reflecting the scene in front of it. With modern photographs, forensic analysts sometimes use these reflections to identify what a subject was looking at. But this is from 1898. The resolution shouldn't be high enough to capture something that small. That's what I thought too. But Claremont was using experimental techniques. And this glass plate is of exceptional quality. Whatever process he was using, it captured details at a microscopic level. Eleanor manipulates the image, isolating the tiny reflection visible in the boy's tear-filled eyes. She applies additional enhancement filters specifically designed to extract information from reflective surfaces. I've isolated the reflection and run it through our enhancement protocol. It's basically reconstructing the image that would have been reflected in the boy's eye at the moment the photograph was taken. The screen shows a progressively clearer image emerging from what was previously just a tiny highlight in the boy's eye. But the resolution is still too low to make out specific details. It's still too blurry to make out clearly, James observes. Wait. Eleanor applies additional filters, adjusting parameters and running more sophisticated enhancement algorithms. The image gradually becomes clearer, revealing something neither of them expected. What emerged from that reflection would lead to questions that extended far beyond photographic techniques or historical documentation. It would challenge their understanding of history itself. As the enhanced image resolves on the screen, they can now clearly see a man's face reflected in the boy's eye. But it's not the face of Thomas Claremont as they had expected. That's not Claremont, James says, comparing the reflection to a known photograph of the Victorian photographer. No, it isn't. And that's not all, Eleanor replies, her voice tense with excitement and confusion. She zooms out slightly to show more of the reflected scene. The man in the reflection appears to be holding something up to his face, something that looks nothing like the bulky cameras of the 1890s. What is that he's holding? James asks, leaning in closer. I don't know, but it doesn't look like any camera from the 1890s that I've ever seen. The shape is all wrong. It's too compact, too streamlined. And look at this part here. She points to a section of the reflected device. It almost looks like it has some kind of display or screen. That's impossible, James whispers. Electronic viewfinders wouldn't be invented for another century. They stare at the image in silence, both struggling to make sense of what they're seeing. The reflection clearly shows a man using a device that shouldn't have existed in the Victorian era. To understand the significance of what they were seeing, Professors Wright and Harlow needed to delve deeper into the life and work of Thomas Claremont and the identity of the crying boy. Let us return to 1898 to learn more about the boy whose tears captured a mystery that would span generations. His name was William Cooper, though everyone called him Billy. He was 8 years old and had been working at the mill for 2 years already, following in the footsteps of his father and older brothers. Billy was small for his age, the result of poor nutrition and the stunting effects of long hours spent in the dust-filled factory environment. Despite this, he was quick-witted and observant, with an innate intelligence that was noticed by several adults in his life, including Thomas Claremont. On the evening captured in the photograph, Billy makes his way home after his shift at the mill. The street is lined with identical brick houses, smoke rising from each chimney as families prepare their evening meals. The houses are cramped terraces, built hastily to accommodate the influx of workers drawn to the industrial centers. Each narrow dwelling typically houses 8 to 10 people, with multiple families often sharing the limited space. Children play in the gutter despite the cold, their clothes ragged but their games animated. A group of boys kick a makeshift ball made of rags bound with string, while girls play hopscotch on chalked squares. Billy passes them without joining in, too tired from his day's labor. Billy enters one of the houses, its interior dimly lit by a single gas lamp to save on fuel. The main room serves as both kitchen and living area, with a small coal fire providing minimal heat. His mother, Margaret Cooper, stands at the stove, stirring a pot of thin soup that will need to feed the family of 7. There you are, Billy. Where have you been? Your father will be home soon and wants his supper ready. Margaret Cooper is thin and prematurely aged at 35, her hands red and chapped from washing laundry for wealthy families to supplement the family income. Despite the hardships of her life, her eyes still hold kindness, especially when she looks at her children. Sorry, ma'am. Mr. Jenkins kept me late to clean under the looms. Billy's voice is hoarse from the cotton dust, a constant irritant that leaves mill workers with chronic coughs and, eventually for many, the deadly white lung disease that had claimed his oldest brother the previous winter. Well, wash up then, and stop that crying. Men don't cry. That's what your father says. She ruffles his hair affectionately despite her words, understanding the exhaustion that brings tears to her son's eyes, but knowing her husband's harsh views on showing emotion. I'm not crying, ma'am. It's just the cotton dust. Makes my eyes water something fierce. Like many children of his time, Billy had learned to hide his emotions. Hardship was simply a fact of life, and complaining was seen as weakness. Victorian values emphasized stoicism and endurance, particularly among the working class, where daily survival left little room for addressing emotional needs. Later that evening, Billy lies on a thin mattress shared with his two remaining brothers in the small back room of the house. The walls are so thin that conversations in neighboring houses can be heard, and through them, voices can be heard. Billy's parents arguing in hushed tones in the main room. I told you, Margaret, we need the money. The boy stays at the mill. His father's gruff voice insists. Thomas Cooper is a hard man, made harder by a life of grinding labor. He started in the mines at age 7 and moved to factory work in his 20s, his body bearing the scars of both dangerous professions. He's not a cruel man by nature, but necessity has calcified his heart against softer emotions. But Mr. Claremont said there might be a place at the school. Billy's smart. He could learn to read proper. Margaret pleads. Reading won't put food on the table. That photographer filling your head with nonsense, taking pictures, stirring up trouble. Who does he think he is? The argument continues, his father's voice growing louder while his mother's responses become more subdued. It's a familiar pattern in the Cooper household, and in most homes in their neighborhood. Men, broken by systems of labor that treated them as machinery rather than humans, often brought that same harshness home. Thomas Claremont had indeed spoken with Billy's mother earlier that week. Unlike most middle-class reformers who kept their distance from the working poor, Claremont engaged directly with the families he photographed. He had noticed Billy during previous visits to document the mill, impressed by the boy's quickness and curiosity. Mrs. Cooper, your son has a quick mind. I've watched him solve problems at the mill that confound children twice his age. Education could open doors for him that the factory never will. Claremont had approached Margaret as she hung laundry in the small yard behind the Cooper home, careful to time his visit when Thomas Cooper would be at work. That's all well and good, Mr. Claremont, but we need his wages. Even the few shillings he brings home make the difference between eating and going hungry some weeks. Margaret wrung water from a shirt as she spoke, her practical concerns immediately apparent. For working families, every penny was accounted for, and children's wages were often essential to survival. There are charitable foundations that could help. The Society for the Betterment of Working Children has a stipend program precisely for cases like Billy's. They provide not only school fees but a small allowance to replace the lost wages. Hope flickered across Mrs. Cooper's face, quickly replaced by skepticism. Like most working-class people, she had learned to be wary of promises from those of higher social standing. His father won't hear of charity. Too proud he is. It's not charity, Mrs. Cooper. It's investment in the future. Think about it, please. Billy deserves a chance at something better than the mill. Something better than... Claremont hesitated, then continued more softly. Something better than what happened to your eldest. Margaret's eyes filled with tears at the mention of her dead son. I'll think on it, Mr. Claremont, but I can't promise anything. My husband has the final say in such matters. What Mrs. Cooper couldn't have known was that Thomas Claremont had a personal connection to the plight of children like Billy, a connection that went beyond professional interest or social conscience. There was something in Claremont's eyes when he spoke of the children that suggested deeper knowledge, almost a personal guilt, though for what, Margaret couldn't say. Back in the cramped bedroom, the argument has stopped. The house is quiet except for the breathing of his brothers and the occasional cough from someone down the street. In the nearby houses, similar scenes played out nightly. Exhausted workers preparing for another day of labor, parents worrying over finances, children sleeping fitfully before their early morning shifts. Billy reaches under his thin pillow and pulls out a treasured possession, a small torn page from a book with a colored illustration of a magnificent sailing ship on stormy seas. Despite never having learned to read, Billy treasured this page, imagining the places he might go if his life had been different. It had been given to him by Claremont after their first meeting, when the photographer had noticed Billy staring longingly at a book he carried. The world is bigger than Preston, Billy, Claremont had told him. Remember that. There are places where the air is clean and children spend their days learning, not working. Billy traces the outline of the ship with his finger before carefully hiding it again. The illustration, with its vibrant colors and dynamic scene, represented everything his gray, sooty world was not: adventure, freedom, possibility. That night, listening to his father's anger and his mother's quiet defeat, Billy made a decision that would alter not only his fate, but would eventually lead to the mystery that Professor Wright would uncover more than a century later. Before dawn the next morning, while the house is still silent, Billy quietly gets dressed in the dark. He takes the book page, a small piece of bread saved from the previous night's supper, and a few other meager possessions, wrapping them in a cloth. His movements are careful, practiced. He has planned this moment for days, ever since the accident at the mill that had convinced him he could not continue there. Silently, he slips out of the house, pausing only briefly to look back at the place that, despite its hardships, has been the only home he's known. The sky is just beginning to lighten, the air thick with coal smoke even at this early hour. Most workers won't begin their trek to the factories for another hour, giving Billy time to disappear into the maze-like streets of Preston. The next morning, Billy Cooper did not report to the Millfield Cotton Mill. In fact, he would never set foot in a factory again. His absence was noted by the foreman, who docked his father's pay as punishment, a common practice that ensured parents kept their children working. By midday, Thomas Cooper had been informed, his rage and worry competing as he left his shift early to search for his son. Back in the present day, James and Eleanor continue their investigation into the mystery of the Claremont photograph. I've been researching Claremont's subjects. Many of the children he photographed were identified in his notes, but this boy wasn't. Just listed as boy outside Millfield, November 14th, 1898. James has spent days combing through Claremont's surviving documentation, held in various archives across northern England. While the photographer was meticulous in recording names and circumstances for most of his subjects, this particular boy remained anonymous in the official record. What about local records? School registries? Census data? Eleanor suggests, knowing that Victorian bureaucracy, for all its flaws, kept extensive records. I've cross-referenced with the 1901 census for the area. There were several families named Cooper, but none with a son of the right age named William or Billy. James brings up several documents on his tablet, showing Eleanor the results of his research. He could have moved, or not survived. Child mortality was still high, especially among the working poor. James completes her thought, giving voice to the grim reality of Victorian industrial life. Childhood diseases, industrial accidents, and malnutrition claimed countless young lives, often leaving little record beyond a brief mention in parish death registers. But something about this explanation didn't satisfy Professor Wright. The mystery of the boy's identity was compelling enough, but it was the reflection in his eyes that continued to trouble her. There was something about this case that defied conventional historical explanation. The next day, Eleanor sits with Dr. Marcus Chen, an expert in optical physics and digital forensics from the university's science department. Marcus has been called in to verify Eleanor's enhancement work and provide expert opinion on the reflected image. It's remarkable resolution for a photograph of this period, but not impossible. Claremont was experimenting with silver bromide emulsions that were quite advanced for the time. Marcus studies the enhanced images on Eleanor's computer, his expression thoughtful. As one of the leading experts in his field, he's helped law enforcement agencies extract evidence from damaged or degraded photographic material, but has never worked with anything as old as the Claremont plate. But the reflection? Could that level of detail really be captured? Eleanor presses, still skeptical that 19th century technology could record such minute details. Theoretically, yes. The human cornea reflects approximately 0.5% of incoming light. If the conditions were right, bright sunlight, proper angle, exceptional lens quality, it's possible. Unlikely, but possible. Marcus examines the enhanced image of the reflection more closely, his brow furrowing as he notices something unusual. However, I'm more concerned with what the reflection shows. "Oh, what do you make of it?" Eleanor asks, relieved to have confirmation that she's not imagining things. "It looks almost like, well, if this were taken today, I'd say it was someone wearing some kind of specialized camera or viewing device. But in 1898, Marcus trails off, unwilling to speculate further without more evidence. The enhancement revealed a detail that defied easy explanation. The man reflected in the boy's eye appeared to be wearing something over or around his right eye, something that resembled no photographic equipment known to exist in the Victorian era. It was smaller than the bulky cameras of the period, with what appeared to be a glowing element that would have been impossible with the technology of the time. Over the next week, Eleanor and James pore through historical records, photographic archives, and technical manuals from the late 19th century. They consult with experts in Victorian technology, photographic history, and industrial archaeology, seeking any documentation of experimental photographic devices that might explain what they were seeing. Their search took them through dusty archives and digital databases, examining patents filed in the 1890s, correspondence between photographers, and technical journals of the period. Nothing they found could explain the device reflected in Billy Cooper's eye. One afternoon, James bursts into Eleanor's office, clutching a stack of printouts, his expression excited. "I found something, not about the device, but about Claremont himself." He places an old newspaper on her desk, a digitized copy of a local publication from the era. The Preston Chronicle, December 3rd, 1898. Just weeks after this photograph was taken. Eleanor looks at the headline. "Local photographer missing, foul play suspected. Claremont disappeared," she asks, skimming the article. According to this, he was last seen on November 16th, 1898, 2 days after he took the photograph of the boy. Eleanor reads the article more carefully, noting the details. Witnesses reported seeing him with a young boy near the train station. Could that be our boy from the photograph? It gets stranger. His body was found 3 weeks later near the Liverpool docks. The official cause of death was drowning, ruled accidental, but his camera and photographic plates were missing. Eleanor looks up, the implications immediately apparent. So how did this plate end up back in Preston, in its original box? Exactly, and there's more. The article mentions that before his death, Claremont had been working on what he called a revolutionary method of capturing images that would change the understanding of photography. He never filed a patent or published his technique. The mystery was deepening. A photographer with a secret technique, a missing boy, an unexplained reflection, and a photographic plate that somehow returned to its box after its owner's death. What had really happened in those final days of Thomas Claremont's life? To answer this question, we must return to 1898, to the morning after Billy Cooper ran away from home. Billy makes his way through the foggy morning streets, careful to avoid anyone who might recognize him. He heads not toward the factory, but in the opposite direction, toward the commercial district of Preston. The town is coming to life around him. Shopkeepers raising their shutters, delivery boys on bicycles weaving through the streets, the occasional motor car startling pedestrians with its noisy engine. On that cold November morning, Billy Cooper was looking for one person, Thomas Claremont. The photographer had mentioned having a studio near the market square, where he developed his photographs and met with potential clients. Billy had accompanied his mother there once, when Claremont had taken their family portrait, a rare luxury paid for by the photographer himself as part of his documentary project. Billy finds the modest storefront, its window displaying several of Claremont's photographs, landscapes and portraits, but none of his more controversial social documentary work. A sign in elegant script reads, "T. Claremont, Photographic Services." He hesitates, then knocks tentatively on the door, afraid he might be turned away but having nowhere else to go. The door opens to reveal Claremont, his expression quickly changing from professional politeness to surprise. "Billy, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the mill?" Billy stands nervously on the doorstep, aware that by now his father will be looking for him, possibly with the police. "I want to go to school, sir, like you told my ma'am, but my father won't allow it." Claremont glances up and down the street, then ushers the boy inside, locking the door behind them. The photographer's face shows concern mixed with something else, a kind of resigned determination, as if Billy's appearance has forced a decision he's been avoiding. "Your father will be looking for you. This is serious, Billy. Running away is not a simple matter." The studio is warm compared to the chilly street, heated by a small coal stove in the corner. The walls are covered with photographs, Claremont's commercial work alongside his social documentary images. Equipment and chemicals line shelves and tables, the smell of developing solutions filling the air. "I can't go back, sir. Not to the mill. Not after." Billy trails off, his eyes filling with tears again at the memory. "After what, Billy? Did something happen?" Claremont kneels to look the boy in the eye, his voice gentle but urgent. "Jimmy Perkins got caught in the loom yesterday. His arm." Billy shudders, the trauma still fresh. "They said he won't work again, and Mr. Jenkins said it was Jimmy's fault for being careless. But it wasn't. The safety guard was broken. I told Mr. Jenkins last week, but he said repairs cost money. Billy's voice rises with indignation at the injustice, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "This is exactly why I do this work, to show the world these injustices." Claremont's expression darkens, a deep anger flickering across his features before being replaced by resolve. The conditions in these mills are criminal. Children losing limbs, developing lung diseases, all for profit. In that moment, Thomas Claremont made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences, both for himself and for the boy who stood before him. "Wait here," he tells Billy, disappearing into the back of the studio. Billy takes the opportunity to look around the space. The studio is filled with photographic equipment, glass plates, chemicals, and prints hanging to dry on lines strung across the ceiling. At the back is a door leading to what appears to be Claremont's living quarters. The photographer evidently lives a solitary life devoted to his work. Claremont returns a few minutes later, having changed into more practical clothing and gathered some papers. "You can stay here tonight, Billy. Tomorrow we'll speak with the school headmaster and the society representatives. But I must send word to your mother so she doesn't worry. She'll tell my father." Billy protests, fear evident in his voice. "Perhaps, but she deserves to know you're safe." Claremont sits at a desk, beginning to write a note. As he writes, Billy continues to explore the studio, fascinated by the equipment so different from the mechanical looms he's accustomed to. What Billy noticed next would later become significant to Professors Wright and Harlow's investigation. He stops at a workbench where an unusual device sits partially covered by a cloth. Unlike Claremont's other cameras, this one is smaller, more compact, with strange materials that don't look like the wood and brass of conventional photographic equipment. Curious, Billy reaches for the cloth. "Careful, Billy. That's very delicate and unusual." Claremont's sharp voice startles Billy, who pulls his hand back quickly. The photographer has moved with surprising speed across the room. "What is it, sir?" Billy asks, curiosity overcoming his momentary fear. Claremont hesitates, clearly conflicted about how to answer. "It's a new type of camera, something I've been developing." The partially visible device looks unlike any camera of the period, more compact, with unusual glass or crystal components that seem to glow faintly in the studio's dim light. "It allows me to capture images in a different way, to see things that ordinary cameras cannot." Claremont's explanation is vague, and there's something in his tone that suggests he's not telling the whole truth. Billy, however, is satisfied with the answer, his attention already drawn to other fascinating items in the studio. Little did Billy know that this strange device would become central to a mystery that would span more than a century. Back in the present day, Eleanor and James continue to piece together the puzzle of the Claremont photograph. "I've been thinking about that reflection. What if we've been looking at this backward?" Eleanor suggests, a new theory forming in her mind. "What do you mean?" James looks up from the historical documents he's been examining. "We've been assuming that the reflection shows Claremont taking the photograph, but what if it's not Claremont? What if it's someone else entirely?" Eleanor pulls up the enhanced reflection again, this time applying a different set of filters to better define the spatial relationships. "Look at the angle. Based on the position of the reflection in the boy's eye, this person would have been standing directly beside, or even slightly behind Claremont." James studies the image, considering the implications. A second photographer? An assistant, perhaps? Possibly. But none of the historical records mention Claremont having an assistant. He appears to have worked alone throughout his career. Then who was this person? And why doesn't he appear in any of the documentation? These questions led them down a new investigative path. If the reflection showed someone other than Claremont, they needed to identify this mystery figure and understand his connection to both the photographer and the boy. To answer these questions, Professors Wright and Harlow needed to learn more about what happened after Claremont took Billy Cooper into his care. The next morning in 1898, Claremont and Billy prepare to leave for their meeting with the school headmaster. Claremont has dressed Billy in some of his own clothes, altered to fit the boy's small frame. The photographer seems tense, constantly glancing out the window as if expecting trouble. "We'll need to be careful," he tells Billy. "Your father may have reported you missing by now. The police could be looking for you." Billy nods, understanding the seriousness of his situation but determined not to return to the mill. As they prepare to leave, there's a sharp knock at the door. Claremont freezes, then gestures for Billy to hide in the back room. "Wait here, Billy. Stay quiet." Billy retreats to the small living quarters behind the studio, leaving the door slightly ajar so he can hear what happens. Claremont straightens his vest, composes his expression, and opens the front door. A stern-looking man in a bowler hat stands on the doorstep, flanked by a uniformed police constable. Mr. Thomas Claremont, I'm Inspector Blackwood, Preston Police. I'd like to ask you some questions about a missing child. William Cooper. Claremont's posture stiffens, but his voice remains steady. Inspector, I can explain. The boy came to me for help. So you admit you have him? Do you realize this could be considered abduction, Mr. Claremont? The inspector steps into the studio without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the space for signs of Billy. Nothing of the sort. Billy ran away from home and an abusive situation at the mill. I was just about to take him to speak with the education authorities. Claremont stands his ground, though Billy can see from his hiding place that the photographer's hands are trembling slightly. That's not for you to decide, sir. His father has reported him missing and is quite distraught. The inspector's tone suggests he finds Claremont's social reform efforts distasteful at best, criminal at worst. What Inspector Blackwood didn't reveal was that he had been paid by the mill owner to ensure that Billy returned to work. Child labor was essential to keeping costs down, and any threat to that system was dealt with swiftly. The alliance between industrial powers and local authorities was strong, with factory owners often serving as magistrates or funding police activities. From his hiding place, Billy listens with growing panic. The thought of being forced back to the mill, back to the dangerous machinery that had maimed Jimmy Perkins, fills him with terror. He looks around frantically, then makes a split-second decision. He grabs something from Claremont's workbench, the strange camera-like device, and stuffs it into his bag along with some of Claremont's photographic plates. If he has to run, perhaps having something valuable will help him survive on his own. Billy's next actions were driven by fear and desperation, a child's impulsive attempt to escape what he saw as a return to misery. He slips out through a small window in Claremont's washroom, dropping into the narrow alley behind the building. As he runs, the device in his bag clanks against the glass plates, the sound masked by the general noise of the busy commercial district. His heart pounds with the fear of capture, but also with the exhilaration of escape. For the second time in as many days, he has chosen his own path. Meanwhile, at the front of the studio, Claremont realized what was happening. As the inspector continued his questioning, Claremont heard the faint sound of the back window opening. "Inspector, if you'll excuse me a moment, I need to check something." Without waiting for permission, Claremont hurries to the back room, finding it empty with the window ajar. But it's not Billy's absence that causes the blood to drain from his face. It's the empty space on his workbench where the experimental device had been. No. The device. He returns to the inspector, visibly agitated, his mind racing to formulate a plan. I need to find him, now. It's not just about the boy anymore. What are you talking about, Mr. Claremont? The inspector's suspicion deepens at the photographer's obvious distress. He's taken something dangerous if mishandled. This wasn't entirely a lie. The device was indeed dangerous, though not in the way the inspector might assume. For the next 2 days, Thomas Claremont searched frantically for Billy Cooper. His concern was not just for the boy's welfare, but for the experimental device that Billy had unknowingly taken. Claremont combed the streets of Preston, checked boarding houses and train stations, and questioned anyone who might have seen a young boy traveling alone. On November 16th, Claremont received information that Billy had been seen near the train station, possibly attempting to board a train to Liverpool. Liverpool was one of Britain's busiest ports, with ships departing daily for America, Australia, and ports throughout the empire. It would be the natural choice for someone seeking to disappear. Claremont rushes to the Preston train station, pushing through crowds of commuters and travelers. The station is filled with steam and noise, making it difficult to spot a small boy among the throngs of people. Finally, after an hour of searching, he spots a small figure huddled in a corner of the waiting room, clutching a familiar bag. "Billy!" The boy looks up, startled, then attempts to run. Claremont cuts him off, catching up to him in a few long strides. "Wait, I'm not angry. I just want to help." Billy stops, eyeing Claremont warily. "Are you going to take me back?" "No, but we need to talk about what you took." Claremont kneels to Billy's level, his voice urgent but kind. "The device you took, it's not safe. It's not a toy, Billy." Billy's expression changes from fear to shame. "I'm sorry, Mr. Claremont. I was scared the police would take me back. I understand. But we need to return to my studio. I can still help you, but that device, it needs to be handled properly." The boy hesitates, then nods, trusting Claremont despite everything that's happened. What happened next would remain unknown for 126 years. Back in the present day, Eleanor and James continue piecing together the historical record. The historical record shows Claremont and a boy matching Billy's description boarded a train to Liverpool that evening. 3 weeks later, Claremont's body was found in the Mersey River. But there's no record of what happened to the boy. James has compiled all available documentation about Claremont's final days, creating a timeline on a digital board in Eleanor's office. And somehow, the photographic plate of Billy made its way back to Claremont's studio in Preston, where it remained untouched for over a century. Eleanor stares at the timeline, trying to make sense of the contradictions. It doesn't make sense. Unless what? Unless someone else was involved. Someone who returned the plate. Eleanor pulls up the enhanced reflection once more, studying the mysterious figure captured in Billy's eye. The man in the reflection. Could he be the key? This new theory led Professor Wright to apply a new technique, one she had been developing for restoration of damaged daguerreotypes, to further enhance the reflection. The process involved mapping quantum variations in silver density at a molecular level, extracting information that conventional enhancement couldn't detect. For 3 days, she works intently at her computer, applying layer after layer of enhancement, refining algorithms and adjusting parameters to extract every possible detail from the tiny reflection. What emerged from this process would challenge everything they thought they knew about Thomas Claremont and his work. As the final enhancement renders on her screen, Eleanor stares in shock at the result. That's impossible. The device reflected in Billy Cooper's eye appears to be technology that wouldn't exist for another century. The enhanced image clearly shows what looks like a digital camera or recording device with an LED display visible on its back panel. Technology that wouldn't be developed until the late 20th century at the earliest. Eleanor calls in both James and Marcus to verify her findings, concerned that she might have made an error in the enhancement process. I've analyzed the enhancement. There's no error in the process. What we're seeing is genuinely reflected in the original photograph. Marcus has spent hours reviewing Eleanor's methodology, checking for artifacts or algorithmic errors that might explain the anomalous image. He found none. But it's impossible. That type of device didn't exist in 1898. James paces the lab, struggling to reconcile the evidence with his historical knowledge. Unless Claremont's revolutionary method was more revolutionary than anyone could have imagined. Eleanor's words hang in the air, the implication clear but almost too fantastic to voice aloud. They were facing a historical anomaly that defied conventional explanation. Either Thomas Claremont had invented technology a century ahead of his time, or the alternative was too outlandish to consider, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. To understand what really happened, we must return one final time to 1898, to the docks of Liverpool, where Claremont and Billy's story reached its climax. Claremont and Billy walk along the waterfront, the boy clutching his bag containing the mysterious device. The Liverpool docks are a hive of activity. Massive steamships and sailing vessels load and unload cargo. Sailors and dock workers shout in a dozen languages, and the air is thick with coal smoke and sea spray. We'll find passage on a ship to America. I have colleagues in New York who can help us. You'll get your education, Billy, and I'll continue my work there. Claremont speaks with the confidence of a man who has made a momentous decision and found peace with it. Since recovering the device from Billy, he seems different, more resolute, as if he's crossed some invisible line. They approach a White Star Line office to inquire about passage when Billy suddenly tugs at Claremont's sleeve. "Mr. Claremont, look." Billy points to a man watching them from a distance. The same man reflected in Billy's eye in the photograph. He's dressed in period clothing, but somehow doesn't quite fit in. His posture and bearing subtly different from those around him. And he's holding something that resembles the device in Claremont's bag. It can't be. Claremont's face drains of color. He pushes Billy behind him protectively and approaches the man. "You, how did you find us?" The man's accent is strange, not quite English, not quite American, with inflections Billy has never heard before. "The device has a tracker, Thomas. You know that. It was never meant to leave the facility. I couldn't continue the deception. These children, they're suffering. Someone needs to document it, to show the world." Claremont's voice is passionate but tinged with guilt. "That's not our purpose here, and you know it. The timeline must be preserved." The stranger notices Billy peering around Claremont's coat. "Is this the boy from the photograph? The one you showed me?" "Yes, and he deserves a better life than the one history has assigned him." Claremont places a protective hand on Billy's shoulder. "You know that's not how this works. We observe, we don't interfere." The conversation between Claremont and the mysterious man revealed a truth that would have seemed impossible to anyone who might have overheard. Their exchange suggested something beyond conventional understanding, a relationship and knowledge that transcended the limitations of their time. The device, Thomas, and the plates, all of them. Now, the stranger's tone hardens, his hand moving to his pocket where something metallic gleams briefly. And if I refuse? Claremont stands his ground, though Billy can feel him trembling slightly. Then you'll never return home. Is that what you want? The implied threat hangs in the air between them. Billy, sensing danger, begins to back away from both men. Run, Billy. Take the bag and run. Claremont suddenly shoves the bag into Billy's hands and pushes him away, then turns to confront the stranger. Billy hesitates only briefly before instinct takes over and he flees, clutching the bag containing both the strange device and the photographic plates. He clutches the bag containing the device, hiding behind crates and barrels, watching as Claremont struggles with the mysterious man near the water's edge. Their fight is silent but desperate, neither man shouting for help or drawing attention to themselves despite the violence of their confrontation. In the struggle, both men fall into the dark waters of the Mersey. Billy watches in horror, expecting them to surface, but neither man reappears. There is a strange momentary glow beneath the water's surface, then nothing but the lapping of waves against the dock pilings. Billy Cooper, now alone and in possession of technology he couldn't possibly understand, made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He waits until dark, then finds an abandoned warehouse where he can examine what he's carrying. He carefully takes out the strange camera-like object, turning it over in his hands. It's unlike anything he's ever seen, sleek, with glass or crystal components and small, strange symbols etched into its surface. It's warm to the touch and seems to hum faintly, as if alive. As he handles it, something happens. A light emanates from the device, startling Billy. The light envelops him briefly, and in that moment, Billy Cooper experiences something that would change the course of his life forever. A glimpse of possibilities beyond his Victorian existence. What Billy Cooper experienced next would remain his secret for the rest of his life. The device activated in some way, showing him images and information that no child of 1898 should have been able to comprehend. Yet somehow, Billy did understand, at least enough to know that he held something of extraordinary value and potential. The story of Thomas Claremont and the crying boy might have remained hidden forever, if not for one final piece of evidence that Professor Wright discovered. 3 months into their investigation, Eleanor receives a small, carefully wrapped package at her office. The courier explains it was sent from a law firm in New York, with instructions for delivery on this specific date. A courier delivers a small, carefully wrapped package to her office. The package is addressed to Professor Eleanor Wright, Re Claremont Photograph Investigation, though Eleanor has published nothing about her research yet. With trembling hands, she opens it to find an old leather journal with a note attached. The journal is well preserved but clearly antique, its pages yellowed with age. Professor Wright, you might find this relevant to your research on the Claremont photographs. From the estate of William Thompson. This is Billy's journal, Eleanor whispers, recognizing the significance immediately. The journal of William Thompson, formerly Billy Cooper, provided the final, extraordinary chapter to the story. Written in careful script that showed the evolution from a child's handwriting to that of an educated adult, it chronicled an extraordinary life that spanned from Victorian Preston to mid-20th century America. Eleanor and James read the journal together, their amazement growing with each page. I have never shared the truth of what happened that day in Liverpool, nor of the device that changed my life. Mr. Claremont was not of our time. He came from a future world to document the past, bringing with him technologies I still do not fully comprehend. The first entry, dated 1928, was written by a man of 38, looking back on the events of his childhood with the perspective of adulthood. This is incredible, James breathes, struggling to accept what he's reading. Eleanor continues reading aloud from the journal. The device he created allowed him to not only capture images with extraordinary clarity, but to transmit them across time itself. His mission, as he explained to me during our brief time together, was simply to observe and document, but he broke his oath when he chose to intervene in my life. According to Billy's journal, Thomas Claremont was part of a research team from the future, tasked with documenting historical events through advanced photographic techniques. But Claremont had become emotionally invested in the suffering he witnessed, particularly that of children like Billy. Where his colleagues remained detached observers, Claremont began to intervene, first subtly through donations and advocacy, then more directly by helping individual children escape their predetermined fates. The man who confronted us in Liverpool was Claremont's superior, sent to retrieve the device and return Claremont to their time. In the struggle, the device was activated. I saw Mr. Claremont and the other man vanish before my eyes as they fell into the water. The authorities would later find a body they identified as Claremont, but I know it was not him. The journal went on to explain that Billy had kept one photographic plate, the image of himself crying, along with some of Claremont's conventional equipment. With these and the money Claremont had intended for their passage to America, Billy made his own way to New York, arriving in February 1899. In America, the journal explained, Billy reinvented himself as William Thompson. The device had somehow imparted knowledge to him, technical information, scientific principles, and historical insights that allowed him to navigate his new world with uncanny success. He obtained education, established businesses in emerging technologies, and eventually founded the Cooper Family Foundation, named in memory of his original family. Eleanor turns to the final pages of the journal, written in a shakier hand as William Thompson approached the end of his life. I have lived a full life, established myself in business, and through the foundation, helped thousands of children receive the education I was fortunate enough to obtain. But I have never forgotten Thomas Claremont or the sacrifice he made. The plates must be returned to Preston to complete the circle. Perhaps someday, someone will discover the truth hidden in that photograph, the truth reflected in a crying boy's eyes. The journal explained that Thompson had arranged for the photographic plates to be donated to the Preston Museum after his death, ensuring they would eventually be discovered and studied. He had also arranged for his journal to be delivered to whoever investigated the anomalies in the crying boy photograph, a message across time, just as Claremont had once sent images across time. William Thompson, once Billy Cooper, died in 1980 at the age of 90, having never publicly shared his extraordinary story. His obituary in the New York Times described him as a visionary industrialist and philanthropist whose intuitive understanding of technology placed him decades ahead of his contemporaries. In the present day, Eleanor, James, and Marcus compile their findings into a comprehensive report. After much discussion, they make a significant decision about how to present their discoveries. Professors Wright and Harlow published their analysis of the Claremont photograph, focusing on the innovative photographic techniques it demonstrated. They made no mention of time travel or future technology, knowing such claims would overshadow the historical significance of the images and potentially damage their academic reputations. Instead, they presented Claremont as a misunderstood genius, whose innovations were lost upon his untimely death. 6 months later, the Preston Museum hosts an exhibition titled The Claremont Collection, Victorian Social Documentary. Visitors examine the photographs, including the prominently displayed image of the crying boy. The exhibition text describes the technical innovations evident in Claremont's work and the social conditions he documented, becoming one of the most visited in the museum's history, drawing attention to the harsh conditions faced by child laborers in the Victorian era. Eleanor stands before the photograph of Billy Cooper, studying it one last time before the exhibition opens to the public. In the carefully controlled museum lighting, the boy's tears glisten as they did on that November day in 1898. As for the reflection in Billy Cooper's eye, that remained Professor Wright's secret, along with William Thompson's journal. Some mysteries, she decided, were better left unsolved, at least for now. When we look into the past, sometimes the past is looking back. And in the tear-filled eyes of a boy from 1898, a glimpse of the future was preserved for 126 years, waiting for someone to zoom in and freeze the moment when time itself seemed to bend. Shadow frames.